Good morning, everyone. It's Kim from the Shamrock Quilt Studio, and today we're going to have a little bit of a treat. It's a show and tell, and I want to show you a quilt that I made. It's a little bit of an adaptation of something I found in a book. I'm going to share it with you right after this. Well, welcome back. Now, this quilt has become one of my favorites. It's one of those quilts that you think to yourself after a while, I did it. I actually did it. And what makes this one so special is that there really was no pattern. It's only in a book. Now, it is in a book called Leisure Arts Presents Encyclopedia of Classic Quilt Patterns. This has been a real gem because it is a wealth. It's got 101 what they call all-time favorites. And it's got a little bit of a story behind each one, but it's not one of these books that gives you a paragraph about every quilt. It just kind of gets down to the nitty-gritty of what the quilt is, and then it gives you the components that you need to either create that quilt or, as I did, kind of have it as a jumping point. And let me show you the book here. And by the way, this book was published by Oxmoore House, and I'm looking for the date. The 6th printing was in 2002, so it's a bit of an older book. I don't know what the original printing date was, but that kind of gives you an idea. And it's got some great information about techniques and just kind of general quilting things, and then it goes into all the quilts. And this one is called Cherry Rose. Now, I thought that I had filmed a show and tell of this quilt some time ago, but I could not find it on the list of videos for the channel, so we're just going to do it again. So this quilt is called Cherry Rose, the one that's in the book, and mine is very close to it, but it's not exact. And let me just tell you that it was created by Margie Karavitis. And I think she says she learned to quilt by trial and error, which is a lot like I learned how to quilt. I think probably the big difference there is that my guess is when she created this, the opportunities for learning things were probably much less, because even between 2002, I think at one time I figured out she had done this in the 80s, and maybe I'll do a little bit of research and put this in. But what was available at that time versus what was available now is considerably different. And while you probably would have had more people hand quilting at that time, you have so many more resources and availability to see designs and see people quilting and learn techniques for quilting and designing, even right in your living room or on your phone even. So things have certainly changed. And one of the key things that drew me to this is that it's all applique. The only machine stitching in this entire quilt was sewing the blocks together. Now, for this quilt, it does say that it is in the Museum of American Quilters Society in Paducah, Kentucky. So it's possible that if you visited there, you would be able to see it. And Margie Karavitis was from Spokane, Washington, or Spokane, Washington. Now, the book is really great because it allows you, let's make sure that we're at least in there. It's got all the details about the size and the blocks and all that. And then it shows you the colors that she used, which are very similar to the colors I used. I think my background might be a little bit brighter than hers, but that could be age too. But it also shows you other color combinations, which is really interesting because if you're not a red and green fan, you could do the other colors and they're very striking as well. And then there are pattern pieces that you're using. Now for this particular quilt, let me tell you, there's a circle in 2 sizes and there's a leaf. And then you've got some bias tubes or bias folded stems that you're using. Now all of the stems in the main design are straight, so you didn't have to do bias for that. Now on the outside in the border you would have needed bias. And I'm just looking, I think all of mine was done on the bias, but it's been a long time and I really don't remember. And then the instructions for this. Now, what I didn't do, I did not do her border with the pointed edge, kind of like the prairie points. And I made mine smaller. I only made mine with 9 blocks instead of the 16. Because let me tell you, after doing this for 9 blocks, I was tired of it. And I wanted to get it finished. And going the 16, while it would have solved some problems I'm going to talk to you in a minute, it was just more at that point that I thought I could handle. At the time that I did that, I was working, had a family, and lots of weekend tasks and chores and so forth. And so making all of these little circles and all of the leaves was just a real struggle at times. So anyway, let me just say that my quilt turned out, I just measured it, I think about 83, 84 inches square. And I elected to put a rounded corner on them versus the square. So there are a couple of ways that mine was different. Also, because I only made mine with 3 across and 3 down, I had to adjust the border a bit. I used the little, I'm going to call them little trees or little stems, but in the corners, instead of putting a duplicate of this, I put this blossom here in the corners, because that just worked out a little bit better for me. And then as far as quilting goes, she was an ambitious quilter with this project because she did a crosshatch on the whole thing, but it was a double crosshatch. So what I mean by that is every row of stitching that she did was 2 rows of stitching. So where it came down this way was 2 rows, and where it came down this way was 2 rows. So effectively, she did 2 crosshatches on this, and that must have just been a real challenge. It also said she did an echo quilt outside the vines and the cherry clusters, and the quilt had a crosshatch of 1 inch. If you've ever done crosshatching, I have done it on several projects, and I find something with about a 2-inch crosshatch or 1.5 is pretty doable. When you get down to 1 inch, you're putting a lot of stitches in a project. So imagine doing a 1-inch grid with a double line each time. Wow, just wow. So anyway, that's this project. I want to show you a little bit about what it looks like. And I have taken to using this at Christmas time because it's in the red and the greens, which are traditional Christmas colors. I've got some scraps from my table on it. But that's what this pattern looks like. want you to be able to see that. And then the border. It's very striking. Now, let me tell you the things I don't like about this quilt, and I'll just be really upfront with you. I have a queen size bed that I put this on, and with the quilt being 84 by 84, we'll say, it is not long enough on the sides to come down and cover the top mattress, especially the way mattresses are made this way. If you put this on a bed, let's say in 1950, you probably would be fine. First of all, you'd be putting it on a full bed, not a queen, and your mattress wouldn't be 15 to 18 inches thick. So keep that in mind when you're designing a project or you're looking at a size of an existing pattern. Is it long enough? Every time I use this on the bed, I keep thinking, how could I make it bigger? Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not going to tear this up and redo it. But I keep thinking, well, could I make just an unquilted cover that would go underneath it, that would kind of extend it, that maybe had borders or something like that? That's a real possibility. And it could be that if the trends today continue to make those mattresses taller and taller and taller, or wider and wider and wider, that might be something that we as quilters may need to consider. Because I'll tell you, I've got one that's a king size. It's the first one that I've ever done that's king size, and it's going to be the last one that I ever do as king size, because they're so massive. You spend so much time working on them. And then by the time you get them made, they are so big and so heavy that you can barely turn over underneath them. So I think that all of my projects going forward are going to be queen size or smaller. And also, because this is square and not rectangle, you can't put it over your pillows. And when you put it on your bed, it doesn't even quite get to where the pillows are. So I do have a way to deal with that. What I usually do is, if I'm doing a quilt with a white background, I get a pair of pillowcases. And I typically buy the craft pillowcases, the ones in the little packages at the sewing store or the hobby store, and use those, because the ones that are sold for sheets, I just feel like they're a different kind of fabric and they don't do as well. They get really soft and lose their shape once you wash them. And the ones that are made in those craft packages are cottony enough, but they have just a little bit of maybe a polyester, that they aren't super scratchy and they don't shrink up a lot. But they just tend to do very well. And for this particular project, I made 2 pillowcases that are similar in design to the quilt. And I just put this design on the front. On the back, I just had the little line go through. So it's just kind of a similar design that looks like the quilt. And then I use these as a decorative pillow in front of my sleeping pillow. And that kind of gives the bed a finished look. It's also my recommendation that if you're working on a quilt that is not going to be one that goes over the pillows, old-fashioned the way a bedspread was done, if you're making a quilt in a coverlet style or a quilt style, make something that coordinates with it. Even if you're using a purchased pillowcase or a purchased pillow to sit up there, that you've got something that ties it to that quilt. And that could be just a decorative pillow. It could be something like this, maybe something like the pillow covers that we're making in our block of the month for 2024. Just something that kind of goes with it. And it doesn't have to be quilted. It could just be pieced. It could just have a border of one of the fabrics that you used in your quilt. I have one quilt where I have embroidered pillowcases that I use. It's just something, and I always throw these in the wash when I wash my quilt, just so that they're on the same life cycle of colors and fabric wear, because over time these fabrics are going to tend to fade a bit. Whether they fade a lot, whether they fade a little, whether it takes a year, 10 years, or 100 years, that's dependent upon the fabrics. But if you're using the same fabrics, you don't want to wash this all the time and never wash this, or vice versa, because they won't look the same. So that's a little bit of my advice for quilts and taking a pattern and altering it so that it works best for your needs, and also a little bit about taking on a challenge that you feel confident that you can do. One other thing, when I did this, because I had 9 blocks that I wanted to be exactly the same, what I did was I took the drawing in here. I don't know if you recall seeing it or not, but this drawing, and I enlarged it to real size. And I took the little paper templates that I made all these circles around and placed them on here and drew them exactly where they were going to be. So every time I made a block, I put the fabric on top of this big poster board template, and I used a Sharpie marker to mark where every little circle should be, where every line should be, and then I put my fabric on top of that, and I could see that pattern. So then when it came time to put all the little circles and things on, I could place them right on top of where they needed to go and pin them in place, or glue them in place, and then know that every block was going to be as similar as possible to the next one. And that helped tremendously. It kind of helped keep me on track of what I was doing. And as I made the blocks, of course, as I got to 9 and said, that's enough, then I stopped. So I would encourage you to use that technique if it's helpful to you. If you can find this book, it is just a wealth of fabulous patterns in it, all kinds of designs. So if you can get a hold of one of these books, it's a good read, it's a treat for the eyes, and it will give you lots of patterns if you're looking for something that you want to duplicate or use as a jumping off point. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll try to include some shots of the whole quilt for you. I have some old pictures that I'm going to add in to the video or at the end of the video so you can see. Thanks so much for joining me. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to the channel. We appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next week at the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Bye.